What was it, Ian? If it wasn't a ghost, what was it?
She bears on them very quickly. She turns quickly with this hideous face.
There are two spirits in this building, I believe. But the one down here is not at all friendly.
It's just a different feeling comes over you. It's almost as if you think something bad could happen to you.
These stories are some of the strangest experiences ever described in the UK. We can't tell if they're true, but they are all recounted by ordinary people. Now they are your witnesses. Bluebell Hill in Kent, a local beauty spot that harbours a mysterious secret. Over the last 30 years, there have been over 20 reported sightings of ghostly figures in the roads around the hill.
A road ghost could be any kind of ghostly activity that manifests on our roads. That could include vehicles, people, even animals. The first recorded sightings, which are really nothing more anecdotes at that stage, begin really in 1967. This is 2 years after a fatal car crash on the hill in which 3 young women died. Thereafter, there was one in 68, a prominent one in 74, and pretty well a gap up to 1977, where we have another named witness encounter. In the earliest reports relating to Bluebell Hill, involving the phantom hitchhiker, the girl who would wait by the roadside, she was a young woman, often described with fair hair and light clothing, a Macintosh, something of that nature. And the earliest reports describe her entering the car and describing excitedly the wedding that she was going to be at the next day. She's due to be married the following day. In some other versions, it's been a supposed bridesmaid talking excitedly about her friend's wedding.
But Ian Sharp knew nothing of these reported sightings as he drove home late one night in 1992. Coming down Bluebell Hill, he thought he saw a woman in the road.
When I first saw her, she was standing in the centre of the road by the crash barrier, just standing there. And I was driving down, I was doing about 50 miles an hour, and as I saw her, I started to brake, and then she just sort of, not run, but a fast walk straight out in front of the car. And I hit her, and it seems as if everything went into slow motion. She went under the car, and as she went down, I hit her on her left-hand side, and as I hit her, she was looking at me, eye to eye, straight at me.
Ian jammed on the brakes, but when he got out to help, the woman had vanished. Who or what had stepped out in front of the car? He went straight to the police to report the accident.
When I came back with the police, not knowing anything of this accident that happened 27 years beforehand, I was still convinced there was somebody laying somewhere, and we had the police had torches and they were looking all around and couldn't find anything at all. And it was the policeman then who told me it's another sighting of the Bluebell Hill ghost.
To Ian, I'm sure this was absolutely a totally shockingly real experience. He observed this woman some way ahead, 1,700 yards ahead. It was, I believe, at 10 to midnight on the 8th of November, a Sunday, and he was doing around about 50 miles an hour. And he saw this woman under very good observational conditions, with overhead carriageway lights. A few years before, Bluebell Hill was totally dark, so he had good time to see this woman, be sure of what he saw, not be mistaken, and he was more attuned to what her behaviour was going to be than what she was.
For Ian, the mystery deepened when paranormal researcher Sean Tudor began investigating his sighting.
He bought a book with him. All the police files were in the book, and different pictures and picture of the car. And he said, would I like to look at the pictures of the 4 women who were in the car? And when I was looking at the pictures in Sean's book, the third picture that I came to was I just froze. And Sean took the book away from me, and I said, that's the girl that I hit.
It's not surprising that the 65 car crash should be the focus for the ghost stories that grew up thereafter. We want to assume a connection between tragic or untimely death and hauntings. The encounters at Bluebell Hill are quite varied. There are 3 characters that are routinely seen, so we can break them down into a young child in the age group of 10 to 13. That immediately differs with some of the descriptions of women in their 20s who were the victims of the 1965 car crash, for one. So we have young women in the 20s, a young girl, and most bizarrely, in 1993, and in some subsequent accounts that have come along from different dates, an old haggard woman in dark clothing. This is a character who's hunched in the middle of the road waiting for the vehicle in a similar manner. But as the vehicle slows and approaches with her in the middle of the road, she bears on them very quickly. She turns quickly with this hideous face with beady eyes and a black maw of a mouth, and hisses at them.
Some people have seen an old woman running up and down the hill, and someone else has seen a woman floating across with no legs.
Could these reported sightings be related to the fatal crash in '65? Bluebell Hill had been a sacred site for thousands of years. Is this linked to the women's presence? Or could there be a psychological reason behind these phenomena?
Bluebell Hill has a stock of legends, not surprisingly, long before the Phantom Hitchhiker or the modern spate of encounters.
Many of the ghost reports and spirit reports around the country, particularly in the open air, and that includes the Phantom Hitchhiker reports of places like Bluebell Hill and so on, are also happening in areas where you have a very ancient, you have stone circles, you have runic stones and so on, and they often happen in proximity to those. And there is a feeling that actually what the witnesses are doing is tuning in some way to this ancient history of the site.
When we look at places like Bluebell Hill, we have a natural of sanctity marked by the Neolithic ancestors who 4,000 years ago revered the site enough to build their constructions, their monoliths and stone circles. In more recent times, we come to the Romans, there's a site of a Roman temple on Bluebell Hill, so it was obviously a place that was held in the minds to be something special.
Are the sightings somehow linked to ancient legend? Or could there be a more modern explanation?
The Phantom Hitchhiker phenomenon appears to be not exactly unique, but it has some interesting characteristics, one of which is to do with hypnopompic and hypnagogic imagery. As you go in or out of normal sleep, it's the point at which you're really susceptible to hallucination. And this may happen with highway hypnosis. When you're driving, you may get into a kind of altered state of almost trance-like state. You're aware, but you're not quite with it. And when you move out of that state, because the car has to be adjusted in some way, or direction and so on, you have to turn a corner, then it may be that you come out of that state and you are prone to hallucinations.
It's my belief that at places like Bluebell Hill, where the two come together, where we have a history of reverence by ancient peoples, even today it has an aura about it which people tend to mark as unusual, plus this switched off state, which is the night driving condition. The two coming together make it a prime area for road ghost activity to occur.
Albert Budden, a researcher into electromagnetic fields, has also looked into this hypnosis theory.
It's a kind of highway hypnosis. It's also known as highway hypnosis, where visual stimuli fed in through the windscreen again and again in a darkened situation will create an effect called habituation. This is where these monotonous stimuli fed into the brain repeatedly will cause the brain to switch off. The brain can be triggered by electromagnetic fields, can be triggered spontaneously, people can have hallucinations, and the electromagnetic fields can also alter the environment.
Apart from the ancient stones around Bluebell Hill, there are, of course, very modern artefacts, such as the BBC transmitters, such as ordinary power lines and so on. And there is a whole school of study in this area that those power sources can literally scramble the signals in the brain and create hallucinations and so on.
In actual fact, I've had cases where there have been 2 or more people who have been in an electromagnetic hotspot, and they have all reported the same phantom perceptions.
The mind's important. Are we talking about this woman imagine this form? If so, then lots of people who've heard nothing about Bluebell Hill are imagining the same thing in the same location, the same description, the same pattern of events, and there obviously is a mystery there. Whether it's related to ghosts as we might understand them is another matter, but there's obviously something there that's worthy of exploration.
So are these sightings the result of hallucinations, highway hypnosis and electromagnetic radiation? Or could there really be ghosts haunting the roads of Bluebell Hill?
The figures seen on Bluebell Hill are ghosts in as much as they appear to be figures that are not actually there in the way that we would perceive ourselves to be there, but where they come from, we don't know.
I can't convince myself that there's ghosts. But then the other hand says, well, what was it, Ian? If it wasn't a ghost, what was it?
There are two spirits in this building, I believe. But the one down here is not at all friendly.
It's almost as if you think something bad could happen to you.
In 1995, a small group gathered in this suburban London house to try and discover the cause of a series of paranormal events. Scenes like this are not uncommon, but these events had not been taking place in an ancient castle or a Victorian cellar. The manager of the nursery at this community centre in an ordinary London suburb wishes to remain anonymous.
When we first come here with the children and the staff, it was just quite a normal setting. And then one day, some big cars, like coupe cars, started moving across the room by themselves. The children actually saw the coupe car moving and notified one of the staff. They said, look, the car's moving by themselves. So the staff, in order not to sort of frighten the children, we actually made out we were pulling it by string. We call our ghost Russell. He tends to help us, and I actually think he protects us. I mean, there's been burglaries here where things have been on tables ready to go out the door and nothing's been taken. And I feel that Russell's probably shown himself and frightened off the burglars.
Workers at the community centre soon accepted the strange but harmless occurrences. They even nicknamed the friendly ghost Russell, thanks to the frequent but unexplainable sounds of rustling paper. Staff would often arrive at work to find the kettle already boiling, or the TV mysteriously turning itself on and off.
Once we saw that there was a frequency of what was happening, we started doing a log of dates, times and incidents that were occurring. We would put the day, the time, and there was lots of different incidents, from the cars going around the room to noises to what sounded like tables falling around the building, and you'd go into the room and nothing was there.
In 1994, I became the local beat officer for the area. I came and reintroduced myself to the staff here, Pauline and Dawn. They offered me a cup of tea, and while I was having the tea, I noticed on a metal cabinet an A4 sheet of paper saying Russell's done this and Russell's done that. And I said, well, Pauline, who's this Russell you keep mentioning? Oh, that's our local ghost. I said, you are kidding me, it's a lot of baloney. Very, very sceptical of all of this, you know. I didn't believe any of it. So we did a ghost watch here. One of my colleagues and a few other people came along. We turned up and we had various people in various rooms. I was allocated the main canteen area. And then a few things started to happen. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning and we're sitting there, and suddenly there's a loud ticking noise in front of us. And it's sort of moving around the room. the girls asking me about it. I said, oh no, it's just a clock in the corner down there. And then I remembered that the clock hadn't got batteries in it, and that the kids from the youth club had actually tied the two hands together. So it couldn't have been that. At that point, I started to get very jittery. We then heard, in this room we're in now, which is a wit's room, we could hear the wits downstairs rolling about the floor. Now that part of the building was locked up. Didn't have a key for it. There was no one down here. As you've seen yourself, it's well secured from the back. No one could have got in, but you could hear the wits rolling about and being lifted and dropped. Now that really did frighten me. And it was then I started to realise, well, there's more to this than meets the eye.
Paul Doran's skepticism was blown away by his ghost watch experiences. Desperately searching for a rational explanation, he called in paranormal investigators from ASAP, the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomenon.
The purpose of coming to here is not, in fact, to try to prove that ghosts and spirits and poltergeists exist. That would be a far too pointed a way for us to approach our work. What we come here to try and do is be open-minded about what might happen, about what has happened, and to bring some scientific rigour to the examination of that. Having put a team together, basically what we do is we come in to stake out the place, if you like. We'll call them vigils and so on, and that would include us positioning people in different parts all over the building, controlling the environment so that, for example, we know that no one else can enter the building, we know where we are at any given time, and we even have what's called an EMU, an environmental monitoring unit, which monitors the whole building while we're in it. We try and bring in a balance of viewpoints. So we bring in believers who believe fervently that, that ghosts and spirits are the dead, etc. We bring in as sceptical a bunch of people as we can do as well, so that rather than trying to sort of investigate from the point of view of something we already believe in, we already come in ready to argue with each other in the most constructive way possible.
During several overnight vigils, the investigators witnessed a series of unexplainable events. These strange occurrences were consistent with the stories they'd been hearing from the staff at the centre.
An incident I recall was in the gym area down here when there was a punch bag hanging from the ceiling, motionless, and we would always steady anything like that. We would always make sure the environment was controlled. And this punch bag just started swinging. Now, again, we did have the environment controlled. No one was near it. No one should have been able to move it from physically walking about near it or anything of that sort of thing. And yet, spontaneously, it seems to have started. It's very difficult to explain that. We're underground here, so wind doesn't really come into it. The place would have been closed up properly. The walls are very, very thick here. So that one, again, we thought was something quite strange.
A key discovery by the ASAP team confirmed what workers at the centre had already suspected. Russell, the friendly ghost upstairs, was not the only presence. There was another source of the eerie events in the basement, which did not appear to be quite so affable.
In this building upstairs, there's an atmosphere. It's friendly. It's like Casper, your friendly ghost from the movie. But you come down here, it's very oppressive down here. Can be very frightening down here. And I'll be honest with you, I don't want to be down here. There are two spirits in this building, I believe. But the one down here is not at all friendly.
When you go downstairs, it's just a different feeling comes over you. It's almost as if you think something bad could happen to you.
On a couple of occasions when it has been very, very oppressive, and I have just gone back up those stairs as fast as my legs would carry me because I don't want to be down here. I do not want to be down here. It's fine being down here with a lot of people, but being down here, one or two of you, when you walk down those stairs and you come into this room, or you go into that boiler room, and the temperature drops, you know there's something wrong.
We decided to do a Ouija board, The reason of this was to try and find out who actually was in the building.
They cajoled me into taking part, and I thought, yeah, well, fair enough, I'll sit down here with them. So I sat down with them, thinking to myself, well, I'll see who's pushing this glass around this board the hardest. That was my whole idea, was this is going to be a hoax. Sat down, and suddenly they've started the ball rolling, and then it comes through a message for Paul, and I'm going, yeah. And then we just said, well, who is it? And then suddenly that glass took off, and it shot across that board, PC149Q. My best friend in the police had died a few years before, and that was his shoulder number. Now, no one around that table or in that building at that time knew who he was or what his shoulder number was. And at that point, I jumped up from the table. I'd gone pure white. I was shaking like a leaf. I grabbed hold of a metal cabinet that was there, and I just held on to it until I stopped shaking. And I refused to go back into that circle.
No one in the centre has ever been hurt by any of the extraordinary events, but they continue to trouble the staff to this day.
I haven't got an answer to why they're here. I don't know. I think they're asking for help, in my opinion. I'd be very sad to lose Russell. Although when you walk in the building sometimes by yourself you shiver and shake, I actually think of him as a friend. The other spirit downstairs, I would just like to see shot of. I've got no qualms about that one.
With a lot of the paranormal, you're also down to the witness. You're down to how much you trust the witness. And I found the witnesses here to be totally trustworthy people, including the policeman involved and including the manager of the centre. I had no reason to doubt their honesty. So I think something real was happening here.
During my time in the police service, I've had knives pulled on me. I've been beaten up. I've had guns pulled on me. I've been frightened then, but not as frightened as I am of this stuff.
I ran up the hill after him, but when I got to the top, it disappeared.
They're not really there in any spiritual or intelligent sense.
You know for a fact that you put them there, like keys or something like this, and you'd go back to the place and it wasn't there.
The sobbing, the crying, the lights being turned off, glasses being broken.
These stories are some of the strangest experiences ever described in the UK. We can't tell if they're true, but they are all recounted by ordinary people. Now they are your witnesses. Battle Abbey in Sussex, built on the site of the Battle of Hastings, one of the bloodiest ever fought on British soil. A likely place, you would think, for paranormal activity. Recently, the ghostly figure of a monk has been seen amongst the ruins. Is the Abbey haunted, or is it all just a hoax?
My name's Darryl Birchmore, and I'm Deputy Head Custodian here at Battle Abbey, working for English Heritage. Battle Abbey was founded in 1070 on the spot where the Battle of Hastings was fought in 1066. It was finally completed in 1094 and consecrated in the presence of William Rufus. We've had lots of legends connected with Battle Abbey over the years, the most famous being the curse, which was lifted in 1933. That was a curse that was placed on the family of Anthony Brown by one of the monks, who deemed it unfair that Anthony Brown had been awarded the Abbey and all its grounds, and the monks had been basically evicted from the site. Since 1990, which has been my time at Battle Abbey, I've heard a number of ghost stories here, mainly involving police officers who have been doing nighttime stakeouts, trying to catch vandalism in the act and what have you, and they've seen monks.
There have been no monks at Battle Abbey since the 16th century. But recently, at least 2 witnesses have come forward claiming to have seen a figure dressed in a monk's habit.
Earlier this year, June 2002, we had a school party on site. Nothing unusual in that. We have loads of school parties, but this particular one, it was Sutton Valence School from Maidstone in Kent, and one of the teachers and 2 of her class actually witnessed a monk outside the Undercroft.
It was about 11 o'clock because we'd arrived there, we'd walked around the battlefield, and then we'd walked around the Abbey ruins, and we were then trailing back in groups to the shop before we settled down for our packed lunch. It was a very, very short time we saw him for. We were walking straight ahead and he was to our right, and he was walking towards us and then turned into a doorway. So he would have taken maybe 10 paces that we saw. And you know, I would have thought I'd had too much wine the night before, I think, if it hadn't been the fact that 2 children saw him with me.
He was wearing a white robe and had a bald patch on the top of his head, and well, he had grey hair.
He looked really real because at the bottom of his robes you could see where his legs were touching it when he walked.
His robes did move, they flowed, and they were so clean. He was immaculate, really.
Actors do dress in period costume at the Abbey, but never as monks. At the same spot 12 years earlier, Darrell had also witnessed an unusual event.
During the summer of 1990, I was doing a lock-up for the evening. It was around about 6 o'clock in the evening. The only people I could see were out on the far battlefield. I walked through the chambers, which were a series of wine cellars. No one around at all. And I came out, locked the inner door, and then the outer shutters. And suddenly, there was a banging from inside, real banging, as if someone was trapped inside. I opened up the door, no one there, so I locked up again, ran back to the shop. My colleague, who was deeply religious, looked at me, he said, "You're joking." And then he saw me again, he says, "You're not joking, are you?" He came back with me, checked the place over, no one around. And later that night, he and another colleague went into the same chambers with a divining rod, and it kept pointing to a particular corner.
Jill found out that the monk had also been seen there before. Over 20 years earlier, an Abbey maintenance man had been working at that same spot.
There was a hole dug in there once, wasn't there? And a workman was down the hole, and he looked up and the monk was leaning over the side. I believe, this is what they told me. And the workman completely freaked out and ran away.
Now, what makes that interesting is that was on the Saxon line of defence, where most of the bloodshed happened on the Battle of Hastings.
I have heard since that he's been seen there, since we saw him, and many times before.
The teacher came back to the shop and reported to one of my colleagues, who then reported it to me, that she'd witnessed a monk in the presence of 2 of her children. And what sticks in my mind about this was the fact that she said the monk looked humanoid, not transparent at all. And she actually asked whether anyone was doing guided tours or anything in monk costume, which of course we replied in the negative.
A lot of reports are of monks and nuns, often in contemplation, often walking in rows towards their old cloisters or in their cloisters, often chanting and so on. And I think that's actually fairly consistent.
The last monk left the Abbey over 400 years ago, and no staff have ever dressed as monks. So just what was this mysterious figure? Only a few weeks later, it was seen again. The Rudge family from Wakefield in Yorkshire stopped off at the Abbey on the way back from a trip to France.
We arrived at Battle Abbey mid-morning. We went through the gift shop and out onto the courtyard just in front of the school. We went to the right and followed the designated walk. As we came off the battleground, we decided to take the disabled route, which was up a slight incline, but as we started walking up, Jonathan looked forward and pointed out there was a monk walking about 30 feet in front of us. The monk was dressed in a brown habit with the hood over his head. His hands were raised in front of him and his head was bowed. He He walked from one building across a short pathway into another building. We were stood together. I was trying to get my camera out of my bags. As I say, we thought it was a real monk because it looked so real. And while I'm in the process of getting the camera out of my bag, I also took Jessica's head and pointed it in the direction of where he was, but she still couldn't see him.
I ran up the hill after him, but when I got to the top, he disappeared. I looked left first and he wasn't there, so I looked right and he wasn't there.
The Rudge family had no reason to think there was anything unusual about the monk.
We thought it was a normal person when we saw him. It was a solid figure, and it was walking. We didn't realise it was anything but a real person until we went back to the gift shop. We did ask if there was anybody dressed up as the monk, and they categorically denied that there was.
I'm always disappointed when people come along and say they've seen a ghost, because yes, it's something that I'd like to see myself. I really would. I don't know what my feelings would be if I actually saw something, but I mean, no one's ever been hurt by a ghost, have they?
They were more excited than we were. We were quite shocked when we found out that it was something that we didn't expect, but they were quite excited.
What makes me interested with these two sightings, they're both, as far as I'm concerned, very credible. Both the Rudge family and Sutton Valence School, there was an adult and two children involved in both sightings. Both lots of people said that they saw a solid-looking monk and not the transparent figure. Both were willing to talk about it in great detail to me, and both sightings would have happened where there had been great loss of life in the Battle of Hastings. The Rudge family sort of saw their monk up on the top of Senlac Hill, where the Victorian Dairy now stands, and Sutton Valence School saw theirs on the lower terrace, where once again the Saxon line of defence would have been. So as you can imagine, there would have been bloodshed in both those areas. But why it's a monk and not a knight of some description, I can't understand.
One theory suggests that apparitions like these are images of the past replayed under certain unknown conditions, like a video recording replayed again and again.
If the theory that some ghosts are recordings is correct, then we don't know either what conditions embed that recording in the first place or what caused the replay. But we do know that since the world is not continuously full of ghosts, that it has to be a fairly unique set of circumstances. Therefore, I think it's quite normal, if that's the word to use, that a ghostly figure that hasn't been seen before should suddenly appear, even if it does appear to have come from a long way back in history.
I would like to think that someone was dressing up that day and does it regularly and fools the tourists, because I don't really believe in ghosts.
I thought that the monk was a real person, but I wasn't quite sure.
I've always had an open mind on ghosts. I'm not a believer, I'm not a disbeliever. With these sightings, I think they're very credible, and I'm just jealous that I haven't seen something myself.
I still aren't 100% sure that it was a ghost, but I'll never know.
Could it be a wandering monk with an interest in history? Is it all just an elaborate hoax? Or could this really be the ghost of a 16th century monk returning to haunt the abbey from which he was evicted? The case remains a mystery.
Go back to the place and it wasn't there, but then you look a little bit later on and it reappeared.
Sobbing and crying, the lights being turned off, glasses being broken.
In 1992, the Dartnell family fulfilled the dream of a lifetime when they bought and moved into the Union Inn pub in the idyllic village of Rye in Sussex. Before long, their dream turned sour when the family began to report strange events that began to upset them.
Yeah, it was a dream, and we were perfectly happy for a year, I think. It was fine to begin with, but it just seemed to be a gradual effect. Nothing you would notice, you know, it was sort of a gradual thing.
It was a series of events which eventually I realised weren't normal. I've had experience of hauntings in the past, I have, and I began to realise that something abnormal was taking place. I mean, I know damn well I turn off every damn light. It's a secret as I go up the stairs. All of a sudden, I get to the top of the stairs, the lights will run again, and I knew something was happening.
You just put things down and they would move, you know, and you know for a fact that you put them there, like keys or something like this. And you'd go back to the place and it wasn't there. But then you look a little bit later on and it reappeared. And so you would question your own sanity sometimes.
The noise of the sobbing and the crying, the lights being turned off, glasses being broken, things being thrown around the kitchen, knives, etc. Dancing lights we had at the bar, like little dancing red lights at the bar.
Were inexplicable forces from the spirit world at work in the pub?
We tend to bracket ghost spirits and poltergeists into one phenomena as if it's part of one thing, and indeed I've written books which bring them all in because people expect them to be in one compendium. My instinctive view is that they're not the same thing at all, and that certainly ghosts which may be, say, recording type ghosts, they may be an echo of something that once happened, but the sense of the person that you're seeing is not really there. It's like a video replaying and you're just watching a replay of something. Spirits where there seems to be a real presence, a real person that you can even communicate with, and poltergeists, which are sort of an external activity and noises which go on. Now, it's tempting to think that the dead perhaps can cause all of those things, and we must bear in mind that that may be possible. But I think there's also other possibilities, and that they are not only three completely different phenomena, but even within those there may be lots of different subsets that are actually nothing to do with each other, and that we're mixing them together wrongly.
The family felt the paranormal experiences were becoming more frequent and were taking on an eerie presence.
Well, it was like a great big shadow of human shape, the cloak sort of thing, that just came through the wall, came through anywhere at you, but it was immensely cold. And you knew it was there because you could feel it was cold. Also, you felt something watching you all the time. And you'd look round and as you walked towards the door, wherever you were walking in the room, you'd feel the cold spot, and you knew it was there.
In a room upstairs, you'd go up to it and you could feel the cold as you approached the room, yet everywhere would be very hot and warm. And this one room would be freezing cold. It would be like a block of ice walking through it.
It didn't actually go for you in any way. It just made its presence felt, which unnerved you all the time. And it reached the point sometimes where you wouldn't even sleep. You'd be laying in bed waiting for something to happen. And then, of course, those times never did happen. When you'd eventually fall asleep, you'd be woken up at any time of the hour of the morning with this thing standing there.
But I did feel things touch me and things like this around, and a lot of other people complained of that. You feel as though there was a hand on the back of your neck or something, and it was touching you, and you looked around and there was nobody there.
I do believe in this kind of recordings theory, that somehow the fabric of buildings, the fabric of the land, can embed and record something. Perhaps it takes emotion or particular climatic positions or particular stone or quartz or whatever, but that some unique combination comes together and can embed a recording, just like a video can embed a recording.
I just can't explain what's causing things to move or lights going on and off. I don't know. I don't work in that field, but it just, I saw that with my own eyes, and I'm one of these people, I've got to see things with my own eyes before I really believe.
The Dartnells began to fear for their livelihood as all the stories made the pub's customers start to feel uncomfortable too.
They were sitting in the corner and they just suddenly felt as though there was somebody touching them at the back of their necks, as though somebody was sort of tickling their neck, and it was very sort of sensual. But they didn't like it because they couldn't understand what it was, but it gave them shivers up their back and this sort of thing. And that happened to a couple of the staff members, female staff members as well.
It really was nasty. It used to chase the people around the building, basically.
When we're dealing with spirits, I tend to veer to two types of things. One is that it may be an intelligent dead person, or that it may be telepathy of the living, that you create the spirit, or even that you create the ghost or whatever, in order to receive a message, which is actually a telepathic message. So it's all to do with the living and not to do with the dead, perhaps.
The problems got worse for the Dartnell family when even the staff started to report strange experiences.
We were sitting down and this girl, she was sitting down, and it was as though her face was changing shape and it was becoming a sort of man shape, and she was in a sort of slight trance, and it was only sort of a matter of seconds and it changed completely, and it frightened me. She wouldn't even come back up in here and collect her money. She said no more. She just left, that was it.
The strange phenomena showed no signs of going away. What's more, they started to affect their son, James, who was then only 4 years old.
I was concerned for my son more than anything else, because he was only small at the time, and I was worried about him, and it was having a bad effect on him. It was as though he was being drained of all his energy.
Whenever he came over here perfectly well, normal. He'd leave with drained of energy, physically tired, headaches, didn't want to come over anymore.
I'd come near normal. Sometimes, like when you'd walk into a room, it'd be all cold and you'd feel like somebody's watching you and things like that. And then you'd hear noises, like moaning noises, like my dad said earlier on. And it was that sort of thing, and then I'd started to feel ill. But as soon as I left the pub and gone home or whatever, I'd be perfectly okay.
It was as though he had a continual sort of flu-type thing when he was over there. He had no temperature. He had a normal temperature, but he just felt run down. But as soon as we got him back home, he was fine. But in the end, I said no more, and this was it. Something had to be done, and they got the mediums in.
Eventually, the Dartnells called in a medium to help them investigate the eerie events.
The medium came and he talked to, I don't know what it was, but he said that there were 3 entities in here. One was a young girl, somebody else, and this man who had a beard, and he was a sailor.
Well, from what I can vaguely remember, is that probably when I was little, I imagined it to look like, or I saw it look like, Postman Pat with a beard and a weird sort of uniform.
Now the family were running out of options. They called in a team of paranormal specialists, and after many months of research and investigation, they recommended a ritual to rid the pub of its problems.
They threw water, I believe, everywhere and laid crystals down. And the lady of this couple said my son would be all right after this, and he'd make a quick recovery, which he did. But in an hour or two, his headaches had gone and he was up and bright and sprightly again.
And he did say, my friend's gone. I said, well, where has he gone? He says he's gone through a hole in this room. And it did stop. After that, they put crystals all around the place. And whether or not that was subconsciously thinking it was working, it did work. And he didn't seem to have any more problems.
Of all the theories that I've been impressed with, I think poltergeists are an exteriorisation of internal energy. And most of the best cases of poltergeists, pure poltergeists, seem to involve people who have incredible frustration. It's not just stresses. We all have stresses, but people who cannot relieve those stresses because there's no one to blame, there's no way out of the situation, and they perhaps exteriorise some kind of energy which can literally move objects in the environment. And we've yet to learn about that, I think.
I think that whatever it was, I mean, if it is a ghost, I think it was trying to communicate with him. because he was young, he was more susceptible to it. And he didn't like the intrusion. Well, if you do believe in it, from what I can gather, he didn't like the intrusion of people in here.
I'm left with no doubt now that there is something out there and that we are being visited.
The bells were ringing. There were things happening from the moment you sat down. There was something going on all the time.
These stories are some of the strangest experiences ever described in the UK. We can't tell if they're true, but they are all recounted by ordinary people. Now they are your witnesses. Many people embrace a deep desire to prove their belief that we are not alone in the universe. Chris Martin has spent many hours gathering remarkable video footage of what he believes is undeniable evidence of an alien presence in our skies. His footage is a source of great debate, and there are many skeptics, but Chris himself has not always been a believer.
I was a professional musician, session guitar player, and I was doing that pretty much from when I left school. And I used to do sessions for various bands in the kind of rock genre. I did that up until probably about 97. About 1997. That's when I got more involved in the researching the UFO phenomena.
In 1996, Chris was introduced to the concept of alien phenomena by his girlfriend at the time, Vicky.
It was probably 2 or 3 months into the relationship that she confided in me that she'd had this kind of paranormal side to her existence, that she'd met these entities in kind of dream states at night, and actually physically she'd seen these small figures in her room when she was very young. And I remember being absolutely fascinated, and I wanted to actually try and get to the bottom of that and find out whether this was a reality or some kind of fantasy in her mind.
At first, Chris was not convinced of Vicky's claims, but he started to take the subject seriously when he too began to witness strange objects in the sky.
Well, the very first time we saw a UFO, we weren't actually looking. We were going to the shops, and Vicky saw this white sphere on the side of a cloud. It was a sunny afternoon, and this thing was just hovering on the edge of the cloud. And what was really odd is that it went into the cloud and reversed out. And it did this a couple of times. We both stood there trying to work out what kind of vehicle or aircraft could do that, and we suddenly realised that there wasn't anything that we knew of that could perform those kind of manoeuvres, reversing in mid-air. This thing didn't look like a helicopter; it was round and metallic, and that's when it hit us that we were actually looking at an actual UFO, and that was the first time. But it was I'll never forget it. It was amazing.
After that first sighting, Chris began to capture many strange images on video of objects in the sky that he believes are alien craft.
I popped out into the garden on the off chance to see if there was anything there, and I saw this thing just above the roof, just tumbling. It seemed very reflective, it was catching the light, and I managed to get the camera set up and film the thing. It was probably only visible for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, but it was significant in that it looked very unlike a balloon or a bird.
Some believe Chris's footage plays an important role in backing up claims of an alien presence in our skies. But for many others, the evidence remains far from conclusive.
What's the law of averages here? If you go out and purposely look for something, I'm pretty sure you'll find something, certainly in areas where there's a lot of aerial activity, i.e. London. The busiest airports in the world live just outside London. So it's no great surprise that you can see something and film it in the night sky.
But Chris is not alone in his beliefs. Many people who have viewed his footage believe it to be true evidence of alien visitations. Stuart Wisdom has actually been along on several of Chris's sky watches and has even begun to film his own sightings.
You have to see these things for yourself. I mean, you can show footage, but it doesn't. Once you see one of these spheres for yourself firsthand, it's a whole new ball game. It really brings it home.
This is some of Chris's most intriguing footage to date. As yet, no one has been able to prove whether this is, as Chris claims, an alien craft, or whether there is a more conventional explanation.
As soon as I looked at it, I thought this was something very strange. So again, you know, set up the camera, zoomed right in onto full zoom, and I really can't describe what it was. It was just a very, very unusual orange, horseshoe-shaped kind of object. Had kind of ribs around it. It seems solid. It's not hollow. It's not a kite of any kind. And we've estimated that it's at least 100 feet wide, and that negates any kites or fairground balloons, because there is nothing available in this country that is that size. Some skeptics have said it's a kite that was broken loose from a march that was on that day in London. But again, I've had a look on the internet, and some of the kites that I've seen displayed are very, very small. They certainly don't look anything like this orange object. So again, it's another classic UFO. It's not identifiable.
Over the years, Chris has videoed so many unusual objects that it appears he has developed an instinct for when and where they might appear.
People say to me, well, how do you know when there's going to be a sighting? And I can't really, there aren't really the words to describe how it is, but it's more a sense of knowing. It's like kind of knowing someone's going to visit you. I wouldn't say something that's special, or, you know, I think anyone could do it. Anyone who's watching this, you know, could actually go out and try and initiate contact, you know.
Chris's catalogue of footage is undoubtedly intriguing, but with numerous theories that offer more conventional explanations, ufologists like Chris know they must attempt to approach the evidence with an objective and rational mind.
There's a great will to believe in a lot of people, and it's a common factor that if someone does have an experience or a sighting, then they're looking for further confirmation, if you like. They'll look skywards. Some people just are content to look, while others, in certainly modern times, use technology. They use their video camera or still camera to try and confirm what they already believe or they've already seen or experienced. And Chris may fall into that category. I'm not saying he does, but he may do. And he's certainly got a sharp eye for this type of thing. So points his camera skywards when he thinks he sees something unconventional and films it.
What I tend to do is film whatever I see and then look at it later and then decide if it's something anomalous or not. Most people are not very good at judging distances or size, because if you're dealing with something that's very high up or looks high up, it could actually be something that's very small but very low. But I'd like to think now, you know, I'm a fairly good judge of what I see.
In the past, myself and others would take those less experienced out into the moors to look at the night sky, to show them how to identify conventional objects like the stars and the planets, an aircraft, and even hot air balloons at night, and which are rare, but we didn't know where there would be some. So that if they get a report of this nature, they know how to cross it off the list, so to speak.
When you film a balloon, especially what I've got, where a helium balloon is highly reflective when it's high up in the sky, but with a helium balloon, it's going to be wobbling around, and it's going to be doing sort of erratic movements. A lot of what I've got, it does seem to be, they're either stationary or they do move in a very, very controlled manner.
He seems a very genuine young man, very sincere in his beliefs, and he obviously believes himself that what he's filming is something anomalous, and that's fine if that suits Chris, but I'm afraid I don't share his opinions. I've watched Chris Martin's videos, and with the greatest will in the world, I can't see anything on there that's can't be explained in conventional terms. You know, most of them look like balloons of one sort or another with a few mixtures of aircraft thrown in for good measure. And they don't display any non-ballistic motions. They behave just like conventional objects do, and they even look like them. I mean, that's no disrespect to the gentleman in question, but to me they've all got a conventional explanation. I wish they didn't have. I'd like to say that they don't, but they do.
Well, I was someone that used to be interested, but now it's something that I feel passionately about. I feel it's something that needs much wider public recognition. I think it's something that the media should really investigate and in an unbiased way. I think it should be much higher on the political agenda. At the moment, it's still regarded as a joke and a kind of a cranks topic. I'm left with no doubt now that there is something out there, and it's an old cliche, but I believe that we are being visited, and I have no doubts anymore.
The bells were ringing. There were things happening from the moment you sat down. There was something going on all the time.
In spring 2001, paranormal investigator Montague Keane came across a case that would turn into one of the most intriguing paranormal investigations of its kind.
We came across a lady who had some experience trying for physical phenomena, and she was interested in getting investigated by the Society for Psychical Research, which is a scientific body concerned with objective investigation.
The group claimed that they had witnessed a series of paranormal activities in a house in Ealing, West London. They wanted to prove their claims to a group of independent paranormal investigators. They performed a series of experiments within a controlled environment.
They wanted to see whether they could produce physical phenomena similar to that which they had experienced in another group that I had also investigated, but to do so in conditions which enabled objective and critical scientific observers to be satisfied that there was no possibility of fraud. And she was genuinely enthusiastic about a scientific approach to these phenomena. So they volunteered, this is very unusual, they volunteered to be investigated, and I was doing the preliminary work with my colleagues to see whether the conditions were right.
The experiments were arranged to enable the investigators to discover whether any strange activity was the result of human intervention, or indeed something truly unexplainable.
Clearly, we couldn't lay down conditions that they couldn't comply with, and vice versa. We wanted to have conditions which would be acceptable to us from the point of view of controls against fraud or deception of any sort, so they had to be pretty rigorous. On the other hand, they had to agree what they could do.
The investigators insisted that everyone in the sealed-off room was secured behind a large net curtain to prevent any tampering. However, the previous strange activity in the house had occurred in virtual darkness, and this would have to be replicated if the experiments were to reveal anything. With all conditions in place, Montague Keane didn't have to wait long for the strange activity to begin.
One of the most interesting and exciting things that happened almost at the beginning was that in front of the curtain there was a small table. It's a little pedestal table, only about 2 feet wide, and the table would rise in the air, turn over so that it was the top was facing us, and would greet us by just bending down in front of us, one after the other, moving along the rows, clearly intelligently motivated.
This bizarre event was also witnessed by Veronica Ford, one of several observers present at the experiments.
Well, as soon as the table started responding to me, I thought, my God, this is real. This is not this is not anyone's imagination. This is for real.
After the table had, as it were, greeted us by moving across the row, the table then having been upended in some way, bending itself towards, it did this gentle dance backwards and forwards in time for the music.
I found that incredible because it was up so high, nobody else could touch it.
The investigators were truly intrigued by the strange movements of the ordinary objects in the sealed-off room. But in near total darkness, the real evidence remained inconclusive. The observers could hear unexplained sounds and make out movements in the dark. They even felt water spraying around them, but couldn't make out the cause of any of the strange events.
Bells were ringing. There were things happening from the moment you sat down. There was something going on all the time.
So what could have been causing these strange occurrences? The investigators had rigged up a special camera to try and capture any unexplainable activity on film.
I think one of the most important, if not the most important, bit of evidence for a paranormal phenomenon was the production of films from one of these fairly cheap instant cameras. This is actually the camera that was used, and the film was loaded new, the camera was new. The lens of the camera was sealed by my colleagues, and we heard the characteristic sound of this being pulled out. I don't want to do it now because this is actually still has in it the cassette that I originally put in. And we know that there was no question of substitution because fortunately these films have on them numbers, each one, and so we pulled out a sample film as a control in order to check that the subsequent film that we found, produced by some form of magic, had the sequel number to it, so that there could be no substitution possible.
To the amazement of the investigating team, the camera revealed a series of strange images that Montague Keen is still trying to explain to this day.
The main question was whether conceivably someone could have got access to the camera in the dark through the netting, and after pulling it out, scribbled and scratched around on the top of the film before the gel had done its work. You have about 30-35 seconds to do this, and produced some sort of image. And fortunately, we have one piece of evidence which I think shows conclusively that the picture must have been produced inside the camera.
In one of the photographs, the chemical gel that is released onto the film inside the camera appears to cover part of the unexplained image. Montague Keen claims that this is proof that the image must have been created inside the sealed camera itself.
Bearing in mind that this was A, in the dark, and B, in any case, the camera had the lens totally sealed, and we checked to make sure that no one could have interfered with the seal. But even if they had done, they would have required quite elaborate light and equipment to be able to produce this sort of picture.
The strange events reached an unsettling climax during the third and final experiment. Now in total darkness, the witnesses claimed to have clearly heard and even felt the presence of birds and other wild animals inside the sealed room. Some of the observers even felt the presence of a large snake.
I am terrified of snakes. And even though my logical mind was telling me there wasn't a snake there, I could sense it. And you heard it slithering right up and going up on his lap, and he stroked it. I was so frightened. And I felt ridiculous because I was frightened. And lots of wonderful things happened.
And the most spectacular one was when an owl came in and got caught in the netting, and the noise of the netting you don't actually hear owls screaming, but you hear a very characteristic sound.
There were lots of birds flying around the room, but the one that got trapped, I don't know whether you've ever heard a bird who is trapped. It is really very traumatic to hear it. And you feel so bad because you're sitting there and you're not helping it. And we all sat there totally helpless, and yet every one of us were distressed because you felt so helpless. It was struggling, it was caught up in the net, and we couldn't do anything.
By the end of the 3 experiments, a long series of mysterious events had been witnessed by the participants. Montague Keen was now faced with the difficult task of explaining exactly what had caused the strange phenomena.
I don't think we could have absolutely ruled out an elaborate hoax without introducing something like infrared cameras. I think we felt that we had virtually ruled it out by looking at a combination of all of the things that would have had to have been hoaxed. But what made it, I think, impossible was the fact that one of the pictures produced on the second sitting was inherently paranormal, unless someone had managed to get hold of the camera, take it out of the room, remove the cover, have plenty of light, take very careful, precise photographs, put it all back again and bring it back. I mean, this was a scenario which was just simply not feasible. So I think if you take that into account, and then you ask yourself, well, if that is genuine, would all the other things be fraudulent? Would they have gone to the trouble of faking lesser things because they've already got something which is quite clearly paranormal? The answer is that no, and no one in their senses would wish to do that.
Of light, we've seen triangles, we've seen cigar-shaped objects.
Is it something from another planet, like everybody would like to find out?
It was as if you'd gone through into a different time zone and popped back out again.
They have had a what's called a time dilation effect, or a missing time effect. There's a period of time that they can't account for.
These stories are some of the strangest experiences ever described in the UK. We can't tell if they're true, but they are all recounted by ordinary people. Now they are your witnesses. Bonnybridge in Scotland is a village with an unusual claim. In the last few years, it has become the UFO capital of the UK. Thousands of strange objects have been spotted in the skies above the village. Are they visitors from outer space, or is there a more straightforward explanation? One man has become determined to provide proof that there is an extraordinary reason behind these celestial phenomena.
I would say the first major time was when we got it on video, was in 1991, when my brother came into the house and said, I've seen something, something's chased me type of thing. So we were like, yeah, aye, okay, fine. And we went outside, and true enough, there was this thing flying about in the skies, and it was doing like a figure of 8 in the sky, moving about, and it looked really bizarre looking. As we watched it, we actually watched like balls of light coming out of the back of it and flying away from this object. So that eliminated like obviously aircraft, helicopters, blah blah blah, because there was no noise or anything off it at the time. So that's the very, very first sighting that I can say we've got concrete proof that there's something strange. So that's how it all started.
Bonnybridge, certainly over these last few years, has been probably the centre of UFO sightings in the UK. We often use the term window area for something like Bonnybridge. It's a small geographical area where a lot of things seem to happen. There are others around the country. Bonnybridge seems to be the current one. Now, why this happens, why it should be in this one particular area, is anyone's guess. But the fact that it is, and we just have to live with that. But there are other areas around the country, and indeed around the world, that seem to have a concentration of strange things happening, not just UFO sightings, but a whole host of things.
There was one night in question, I just actually finished work, and I was at the back door of the house. It was approximately 6 o'clock at night, and my dad, it was November, and my dad had shouted at me, "There's something in the sky just at the back of the house." So we started to watch this, like, it wasn't just one, there was 2 or 3 of them, like balls of light doing kind of acrobatics in the sky. And the next thing, there was like helicopters appeared, like unmarked helicopters. And the helicopters, they seemed to be chasing the balls of light. It was like cat and mouse.
There does seem to be 1 or 2 individuals that, for whatever reason, are in the right place at the right time to make these observations. Sometimes it's because of their profession. For example, police officers are often out at night and so on when a lot of sightings are made. So it wouldn't surprise me if a police constable or whatever made a few sightings in a particular area, especially if there were a lot of sightings in that area at the time. The odds must be in his favour. But it's not uncommon for some individuals to be around at the right time, whether they're tuning into something or it's just pure luck is another argument, of course.
From the first one, it just snowballed. We've seen dozens and dozens within a matter of 6 months or so. We've seen loads and loads of balls of light. We've seen triangles. We've seen cigar-shaped objects. You've seen lights bouncing about in the sky. Like, absolutely no way it's aircraft.
Do some people actually see more UFOs? Or are they just more willing to believe in extraordinary explanations for everyday events? Friend of the family John Wilson was skeptical until one night a few years ago.
We were leaving the house to go home. Craig spotted it, and it was over at the back there. So we all come out the house and we all walked over to the gates, and there it was. It was bright, like a bright ball. And I mean, nothing moves as fast as that and comes back and goes up and down as fast as that, do you know? So, and then after seeing it on the video, do you know, it does look like it is obviously something that needs to be investigated, you know? With all the commotion, Jim was saying, "Oh look," and Craig's camcording it, and my daughter's gripping my arm because I think she was a bit frightened, you know? But after a while, after we watched it all, and it just shot from nowhere, you know, gone. It wasn't just there and then it vanished. It was there for a good quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, I'd say. We're all mesmerised by it because I'd never seen anything like that before. My daughter hadn't. Obviously, Jim and Craig has, you know, and it's all on the camcorder. You know, I mean, they even hear me swearing like mad because I've never seen anything like that.
There's nothing that would pinpoint Bonnybridge to be an attraction for UFOs or any kind of other phenomena, and the same goes for other window areas. Like I said, there's many of them around the world, but there doesn't seem any particular reason why, or reason that we currently understand, why they should have a concentration in just one small area.
So why Bonnybridge? There are several airports in the area. Could this explain the sightings?
When you go out sky watching, it's a process of an elimination type of thing. I mean, aircraft, you know aircraft, you can hear them, you know the lights on them, you know the colour of lights on them. Helicopters, again, you can hear them, they've got lights on them, you know the colours.
As well as strange lights, oddly shaped objects have also appeared.
The cigar-shaped one that I've got in video, It was actually, again, we were just sitting in the house, me and my dad and my mum, and it was my brother that came into the house and says, "You're going to have to come and see this." The movement of the cigar-shaped object was nil. It was just like sitting in the sky, and it wasn't sitting in a straight line. It was sitting like kind of a horizontal type of shape. It was weird. It was offset in the sky, but that was one of the weirdest ones. I mean, it was quite close as well. But again, it's hard to judge how close and how big it is because it's in the sky. You've not got anything to kind of like any backing to judge size or scale on it.
Most sightings, if not all sightings, of lights in the sky, irrespective of whether they're backed up by video or film footage, have a conventional explanation. Vast majority of them, without question, are aircraft. The next category are known astronomical observations, stars, planets and so on. And I've no reason to believe that just because, you know, he's made a lot of sightings or filmed a lot of these things, that should be any different.
During his nighttime vigils, Craig has captured hundreds of these objects on video. He has also experienced another strange phenomenon: sudden, unexplained equipment failure.
You're trying to capture something on video that no one else is seeing, and you're intrigued to try and you push yourself to the limits to try and get this, but it's very difficult because it can be frustrating because you're standing there all geared up with your camera and everything ready to roll, and you start taking your pictures or your camcorder, and then the battery just goes bump, and that's it. There's absolutely no power in it, and it's happened several occasions, even with brand new batteries. The reason for the batteries going flat, I have no idea. It could be like power surges or whatever. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, it could just be faulty batteries, but I wouldn't say, like, maybe, I think it's possible like 10 batteries I've maybe bought over the years. I wouldn't say 10 batteries would just go knackered within 10 seconds of the first time you've ever used them.
Could this just be a coincidence?
Most UFO sightings happen spontaneously. You're not prepared for it. So you grab if you've got the wherewithal to grab your camera, you do, oh, I've no film in it. Oh, the battery's low, and so on. So, you know, you're putting two and two together and making five sometimes, but I think it's just because we're not prepared for it. And it's very easy to put a spooky atmosphere around this. And I just went to film it and my battery ran out. It must have been the aliens. Well, I'm afraid not. It's probably because you hadn't charged it beforehand. It's as simple as that.
Strange objects can still be seen in the skies above Bonnybridge. Many people want to believe they are UFOs, visitors from outer space, or even top-secret military aircraft. Craig Malcolm continues to scan the skies with his camera, hoping one day to find and prove beyond all doubt the true cause of these events.
Before the sighting, we used to see odd things in the sky, but you never took really much notice. You know, we'd like talking to Craig and Jem what they'd seen, you know. And then the night that I did see it, it was unbelievable.
It was as if you'd gone through into a different time zone and popped back out again.
They have had a what's called a time dilation effect, or a missing time effect. There's a period of time that they can't account for.
Time slip, a bizarre phenomenon, the apparent distortion of time. Is time travel possible, or is it all in the mind? Cultibragan training camp at Cymru in Scotland, and in the summer of 1993, home to Army cadet trainer Sue Underhill.
It was the 8th of August, and the day was absolutely frantic. Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong, and it was 2:30 on the 8th before we managed to get a book out at the guard room and get out of camp. I drove out of camp. I knew the roads fairly well. I'd actually recce'd the campsite, so I maybe just exceeded the speed limit a little bit because they're not the best of roads, but I was familiar with them. I'd been out to the cadets on the campsite anyway, so I flew down to Ealing, the village where you turn off to go down the tiny road down the other side of Loch Tay. We were already getting very late.
Sue and her colleague David Hardy were heading to the Aberfoyle Visitors Centre, 40 miles away. They had to be there by 3:45. David took over the driving while Sue nodded off in the passenger seat.
The next thing I remember, which seemed an instant later, but you know what it's like when you've been short of sleep for days. David said, "Sue, where's Owen?" I said, "Oh, it's a fishing town on the west coast. Why?" "Oh, we're 5 miles away from it." And sure enough, he'd stopped and reversed up and there was a sign. "Oban, 5 miles. There's no way we're going to get back in time. Just turn around and head back, you know. It's straight back, you know, we must be on the right road. If we go back the way we've come, we're going to get back to where we started from." So he turned round and we nattered away. And we didn't idle, but we weren't sort of belting along because we knew there was absolutely no hope of getting back. And we came across Locker and Head, and I said, "Oh, go straight by. We'd better go to the visitor centre and, you know, just leave a message. He's going to wonder what on earth happened." And I looked at my watch as we approached the visitor centre turning, and it was only 3:15. We'd left our camp at 2:30. If you know, later when we looked at the map, it's sort of a round trip of about 153 miles.
How had they managed to cover 150 miles in just 3/4 of an hour? Albert Budden, a researcher into the effects of electromagnetic fields, may have an answer.
They feel that a short period of time has elapsed and an enormous amount of activity has occurred. This is desynchronization. In actual fact, a normal amount of time has occurred, but their perception of it is distorted.
But why should they even perceive time to be distorted?
I find it very interesting that these two people spent all of their life living on military bases because the military produced powerful communication systems and radar, which is pulse microwaves, and they would have been exposed to higher levels of electromagnetic pollution than the average person, which would sensitize them to electromagnetic fields in the environment. So this is a key factor in their sensitization.
Only 2 days earlier, Sue and David had come across other evidence of a strong magnetic field.
We saw a lot of lights ahead of us. And as we got near it, they were eyes. And we pulled up, and there must have been, I don't know, I mean, I'd say probably 40 or 50, I might be exaggerating, but there seemed that density of cats, all different sort of sizes. Some seemed quite large, and they were sitting around totally ignoring us, but they were right across the road, they were in a circle, just before the turning to the junction. And I mean, we couldn't go, they were there sort of 2 or 3 minutes, and then they also got up and strolled off their different ways. It seemed absolutely weird to me, but apparently I've heard since that there was probably a magnetic field there and they love it and they'd all be attracted to it, go and sit there and do whatever cats do.
Yes, Susan Underhill and David Hardy produced a report on some unusual experiences that they had when they went driving through parts of Scotland. Looking at the areas that they covered, I can see that most of the area is on the Highland Boundary Fault. I talked about geological faults and the energies that these can produce at the surface. They were actually in a highly faulted area that is riven by dip and strike faults, producing piezo-magnetic fields at the surface. Driving through these produce all kinds of anomalous effects.
Could these geological faults produce fields that disrupt perception of time? Sue and David thought little more of it until one evening at the same camp 2 years later.
At 9:30, went and checked on the guard, booked out and drove out of camp. And we headed off for Callendar, where there's a Chinese restaurant. And we spent a good hour over a meal, I would think. I knew we'd left camp at 9:30 because of booking out. And we hadn't hurried to Calendar. But I know as we left the restaurant, it was 12:15. And we set off, walked to the car, drove out to Calendar, and it was one of those magical clear nights that you really only get in Scotland. And the moon shining down on Loch Leonard was spectacular. I drew David's attention to it. Of course, when you're driving, you can't really appreciate these things quite as well. And I was still, I think, admiring the moon's reflection when David went into complete panic, jammed the brakes on, skidded the car to a halt, and there in front of us was our famous sign that we'd seen 2 years before. Oban, 5 miles.
Somehow, they had arrived at the same sign over 70 miles away. But this time, as they drove back, they seemed to be on a different road they had never seen before.
It was really quite spooky. And we seemed to drive forever and ever and ever. And eventually we came to a little village and a railway bridge, and it was quite a long railway bridge. You went round a corner actually under the bridge. It was quite a width of bridge. I'd never seen it before.
The only railway bridge over that road had been demolished in 1965. As they came out from under the bridge, Sue recognized where they were.
And as we came out to the other side, I realised we were actually at Loch Earnhead. And David had gone past it. We had to reverse up because the turning wasn't like it should have been. It wasn't a big turning with your white lines in the middle of the road for sort of right turn and keep left signs and things. It was only a little turning with no white lines at all. And it was an old-fashioned sign. We thought it was probably a different road. I said, look, let's go somewhere we know. Let's turn down it. So we turned down and drove along, and we were beside the loch. The Loch Earn was on our right-hand side, so it had to be the right road. But there was sort of white painted fence down the road beside us, between us and the loch.
The road hadn't looked like that for at least 30 years.
There was still no sign of cars anywhere, no cars parked outside the houses or anything. It was quite really weird. And it wasn't until we got back to Comrie and to the fish farm, just as you turn into Comrie, that the streetlights were there and everything was, lo and behold, everything was just normal.
Areas that they drove through seem strange and unreal. This is another effect that is also very well documented in the neurological literature called jamais vu, which is the opposite of déjà vu. Déjà vu is where something happens to you and you feel that it's quite familiar. Jamais vu is the reverse, where you feel that things are strange.
Were Sue and David somehow seeing images of the past? Driving 70 miles back from Oban, they expected to get to camp in the early hours of the morning. But when they arrived, they found the gates still unlocked.
And we drove back into camp, and David was really annoyed because the camp gates were still unlocked. And it is a rule that they lock the gates up at night. David wound let the window down, and to book back in, the guard came up. You have to book in as well as out of camp. And the RSM came out of the guard room and said, it's not time to lock the gates yet. And we told him what had happened. And he just couldn't believe it because, of course, he remembered on Sunday, the 8th of August, 2 years before, we'd got lost, we thought, and ended up just outside Oban. And here we were, outside Oban again. It was as if you'd gone through into a different time zone and popped back out again.
Sue and David had again covered the distance in an impossible time. Had they also travelled back 30 years? Or is it all the work of electromagnetic fields and jamais vu?
I didn't really realise that we had lost time. It was just incredible because we seemed to have been walking backwards in time. Obviously, now it's amazing that knowing how or what the distance we must have travelled, but at the time it seemed perfectly acceptable.
According to some of the witnesses, there was a close encounter of the third kind.
It sounds like a B science fiction movie. It just does, but there they were, and they weren't from here.
These stories are some of the strangest experiences ever described in the UK. We can't tell if they're true, but they are all recounted by ordinary people. Now they are your witnesses.
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the there it is again.
This unique audio recording is of conversations between US Air Force soldiers and their superiors as they investigate a series of strange lights in the UK's most outstanding and controversial UFO encounter, the Rendlesham incident.
Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. Still getting a reading on the meter, about 2 clicks.
Over 3 nights, up to 40 US Air Force personnel from bases in Suffolk saw strange lights nearby. There are many conflicting accounts and interpretations of what actually happened in the forest. Even those who believe that something unusual happened do not all agree. Former airman Larry Warren was one of the witnesses who came forward.
On December 28, 1980, at that period in time, I was a security policeman at RAF Bentwaters, and I had a secret clearance. I was an airman first class, and I was assigned a D flight. That night, I showed up at 11:30 on the Bentwaters flight line for guard mount. I was in a 5-man group, and I was told to move off into the forest.
The big event took place on the night of the 28th and the early morning of the 29th of December. This is when the huge spaceship landed. It was about 30 foot wide and multiple colors, sort of spinning if you like, and there were about 30 to 40 witnesses in this incident.
I think it's something other than the ground. I think it's something variable here.
The first 2 witnesses that were involved in this incident were told to go out to investigate lights over the forest.
There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange.
The first thing I saw was a probably 50 foot across diameter, yellowish green translucent object on the ground. It was probably a foot in height. It was attached to the ground. It wasn't hovering above it, but had shape and definition. You could see through it at times periodically, and the lights went from green to yellow mist, is all I can describe it as. It was like a platform, but fluid. Beyond all this was a farmer's house, and there was a light on the 2nd floor. There was a car in the driveway, and there were people probably outside watching this also.
We do have evidence that the first incident took place because we've got the photograph of the landing site. Also, a patrol went out following this and took radiation readings.
Setting your glow with a red flash. We just crossed the creek.
On the 29th of December, 2 days after the original sighting, the soldiers took radiation readings and mounted cameras in the area to see if they could make some sort of sense of the situation.
To my right, there was a motion picture camera on a tripod, and someone else had, at that time, a video camera filming everything I'm about to describe.
That night, Larry Warren claims he witnessed alien life forms.
The place of the explosion of light was this triangular structured object that had like a rainbow effect on it. It had boxes and pipes or things on its surface. It looked very heavy. It looked very old. I had this feeling it was this old thing. I don't know why. Time seemed to be at half speed. I wasn't looking at this as a rational, normal person. I don't know how it affected others. There was no heat. There was no sound that I can recall. In fact, everything was almost like in a vacuum.
Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way.
Some people ran off, retreated quite quick. The cameras were filming this the whole while. Some people just stayed in place. We were probably shocked, you know.
The man in charge of the patrol was Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. Larry Warren remembers the encounter his team had in the forest, as recorded on the US Air Force tape.
Holt's tape actually describes the beginning of this event, as seen from about 200 yards away through the trees, where the red light comes in and then there's an object or something explodes, and that's what they were seeing in Capel Green through the forest.
Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like a pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. One on the right heading away too. Yeah, we're both heading north. Okay, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
This light came around this blind side of the object. Never saw the back of it. It couldn't move from the area it was in. And inside the light were these, the light diminished in brightness. It was a foot off the ground, and there were what you'd only describe as children at that time. I wasn't the only one that did it. Some other people said I thought these were children. And they had 4.5 feet tall, above the ground, very bright, translucent at points. You couldn't see the lower extremities, but you could clearly see the face, and it wasn't human. But it seemed like it was either a projection, or it was separate from us, or it was protected from us. It was, but it was alive. There was no doubt in my mind the way these things moved. The upper extremities, there was a noise behind us at one point, and the arms on one of these three beings raised, almost like this, in a defensive posture. It had some kind of equipment around its belt, all three of them. And I mean, it sounds like a B science fiction movie. I mean, it just does, but there they were. They weren't from here at all.
According to some of the witnesses, there was a close encounter of the third kind. There was actually beings. These were translucent. They were almost human-looking, but translucent. The witnesses were absolutely in a terrible state. I mean, these are military men.
We see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. 305.
He approached these things. There's been misstatements over the years that there was communication with sign language and all this, like close in the movies. It wasn't. It was definitely a visual standoff. A very uncomfortable one, so it looked, with this phenomenon.
0315, now we've got an object about 10 degrees directly south, 10 degrees off the horizon.
Some of the other people looked totally buried, like everything they knew collapsed. It was done.
We're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground.
We were called off by our shift supervisor back to the staging area, parking area. And it seemed the lower ranking guys were called off first, so I gladly left. I looked over my shoulder, my left shoulder, as I was going over the rise, and this face-off was still going on this field called Capel Green. And I'll never forget it. And there it was. We got back to the vehicles and left.
We're turning around and heading back toward the base. The object to the south is still beaming down lights to the ground.
The witnesses were believed. They made statements. The British police were also called out where the UFO had landed, and they found 3 indentations in the ground, which were photographed. And remarkably, in 1983, they were sent a copy of a memorandum that was written by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, the very person who went out there with the patrol and investigated this case.
For many years, the truth behind Britain's equivalent to Roswell remained surrounded in secrecy, closely guarded by both the British and US governments. Then in 1983, after years of campaigning, the US government was forced to release official documents on the incident under the Freedom of Information Act. This controversial report is signed by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, the commander in charge on the night.
This memorandum was sent to the Ministry of Defence, and it really, what it depicts is what happened during that week. It mentions the triangular-shaped craft. It also mentions that Colonel Holt was out there himself at a later date, mentions the radiation readings, and numerous other things. So here we have, for the very first time, an official document to say that this case actually took place.
The Holt memo, dated January 13th, 1981, just weeks after these events, as important as it is, on official Air Force letterhead authored by a deputy base commander of a very important NATO air base, describing phenomena that reads like science fiction, all that is good and fine, but the bottom line is, I witnessed it, and it's the biggest story ever told, really, when it gets down to it. If this case was brought into a court of law, the testimony from the witnesses and the evidence that could be brought forward would bring this house of cards down in a matter of hours, and that I stand by.
Over 3 nights in December 1980, a series of strange lights was seen at a US Air Force base near Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk. The lights were investigated by military police, but they could find no explanation for the extraordinary sights. In an official memo written by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, he described his men as reporting seeing strange objects in the woods.
Early in the morning of December 27th, 1980, approximately 0300 hours local, 2 USAF security policemen, the individuals reported seeing a strange glowing object in the forest. The object was described as being metallic in appearance and triangular in shape.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point.
Itself had a pulsing red light on top and banks of blue lights underneath. The object was hovering or on legs. As the patrolman approached the object, it maneuvered through the trees and disappeared.
The next day, according to Holt, the site was checked for evidence of anything unusual.
The next day, 3 depressions, 1.5 inches deep and 7 inches in diameter, were found where the object had been sighted on the ground. It was checked for radiation. Beta-gamma readings of 0.1 milliroentgens were recorded with peak readings in the 3 depressions and near the center of the triangle formed by the depression.
On the evening of the 3rd day, Holt himself reported further sightings of unexplainable lights in the sky.
Red sun-like light was seen through the trees. It moved about and pulsed. At one point, it appeared to throw off glowing particles and then broke into 5 separate white objects. The object to the south was visible for 2 or 3 hours and beamed down a stream of light from time to time. Numerous individuals, including the undersigned, witnessed the activity.
Police were called in. After their initial examination, they found nothing significant. They decided that they too could see nothing further to investigate.
Now, the British police were also called out on the night, on the time it took place, but they were actually called at 4 a.m. in the morning when it was all over. So what we have now is a police officer who's saying, oh, but there was nothing there when I went out to investigate it. But of course it was all over by that time.
The official line was that the lights had an innocent, rational explanation, possibly the beam from a nearby lighthouse, but some still think differently.
Throughout the last 20 years, gradually some of the witnesses have come forward and started to talk about what happened. One of the witnesses was told that what he had seen was the beam from the nearby lighthouse. Now, this is 5 miles in the distance. He said, no, I did not see a lighthouse beam. What I saw was an unidentified craft. They kept on, and in the end, he finally said, okay, it was the beam from the nearby lighthouse. He was so upset about this that when he was returned back to his quarters, he actually thought of going AWOL.
Official reaction from the US Air Force and the UK Ministry of Defence was the same and remains so to this day.
The Ministry of Defence have denied this incident. took place. In other words, they just say, oh, it was lights in the sky. It was of no defense significant. No matter how many times people talk about it, no matter how many witnesses come forward, the Ministry of Defence continued to deny that this incident took place.
The Ministry of Defence statement was clear and unambiguous. The lights posed no threat.
The Ministry of Defence examines any reports of unexplained aerial sightings it receives solely to establish whether what was seen might have some defence significance, namely whether there is any evidence that the United Kingdom's airspace might have been compromised by hostile or unauthorised air activity. The judgment was that there was no indication that a breach of the United Kingdom's air defences had occurred on the nights in question, and no further investigation into the matter was deemed to be necessary.
The government of Great Britain has always said these events were of no defense significance. And I countered that by saying we had the largest backline supply of tactical nuclear weapons in NATO secretly housed in East Anglia. These objects were flying with impunity over the weapon storage areas, firing beams of light down to the ground at these hardened weapon storage areas, adversely affecting the ordnance in. That sounds to me like extreme defense significance.
There are actually a number of reasons why the British and American governments would not want to admit that this very powerful incident took place. At that particular time, it was the height of the Cold War. The bases deployed nuclear weapons that we weren't supposed to know about. There was a lot of conflicts going on in the world. But if you actually look back on the historical records on ufology, you will realize that every case is being covered up, including, of course, Roswell.
I've never seen a tree that's, never seen a pine tree that's been damaged react that fast.
So is this Britain's Roswell? The conspiracy theorists and believers had a field day. Though they don't all agree, they felt they had credible eyewitness evidence of sightings of alien craft. But the Ministry of Defense and US Air Force still maintain that there was no threat to air defenses, even though nuclear weapons were stored nearby.
There could be a whole host of reasons why we're talking about a cover-up. It could, in its simplest form, be bureaucracy. It could be red tape, and it's nothing more than that. I mean, our own Official Secrets Act here in the UK buries things for years. Some of it is quite trivial, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be released. It's just that that's the way bureaucracy works. Again, it could be that that's the way bureaucracy works regarding the Rendlesham events. Alternatively, it could be that there was no aliens involved at all, that the events in question were something that our own military forces were experimenting with, playing around with, that went wrong. So therefore there's a reason for hiding this. Military blunders in the past have been hidden for a long, long time. Again, if it is an alien presence, who knows the reasons why this may be kept secret.
Amid the many conflicting stories of the Rendlesham incident, whether it was a lighthouse beam or other rational explanation, Larry Warren still believes that he saw alien beings that night.
To the best of my knowledge, Larry's the only one that actually states that aliens were there at the time, were responsible for this, that he physically saw aliens. I'm not sure that any of the other witnesses to these events even talk about aliens. But to be fair to Larry, he said on many occasions that if you take Larry Warren out of the whole Rendlesham story, there is still a story there. And he's absolutely 100% correct.
How do I know the truth on these events? I know from firsthand experience, and 23 years later, I'm looking for answers still. I was 19 years old when it happened. I'm in my 40s now, and I'm still looking. And I think everyone else that went through them in their own ways are doing the same thing. I don't know what the great truth of who they were that was there. I know the object I saw was not built in Detroit, and I know the pilots weren't lighthouse keepers. It's to be funny about it, but the explanations, the counter-explanations, are more ridiculous than the fact that there was a non-human presence in that forest on the night I was involved, and that was the third night that involved the most participants I've named them for years, long before this was any part of pop culture at all. And the bottom line is, I wrote a book about this just to set the record straight on what happened to me. And 5 years later, I have never been sued for what I said or naming the people and placing them in the roles they were in at all.
Larry has had some difficulties, however. The US government temporarily suspended his passport, restricting his freedom to travel.
I can look at myself and say that I'm the first person ever to be an alleged whistleblower, and I am a government whistleblower, to have his United States passport suspended officially, which does not happen. Our passports are given to us, and it's a matter of constitutional right, unless you're a convicted felon. I'm not. I had mine suspended for a year, and with the simple reason that I spoke about sensitive defense issues on public soil, and it took a former United States Attorney General under 2 presidents, Ramsey Clark, to get it back. Now, I can't think of any witness over the last 55 years in this subject that has had repercussions like that.
Getting a definite heat reflection off the tree, about 3 to 4 feet off the ground. Yes, where the same spot is, the same place as the spot.
20 years after the event, the Ministry of Defense released documents relating to the Rendlesham incident. But this was not enough to satisfy the believers.
There were more than 150 documents, but there were really only 12 documents that were very important to the case. Most of them were just letters from the public or letters from MPs. I mean, over the years, members of Parliament have asked questions in the House of Lords, you know, but still, the Ministry of Defence denied that this incident was of any defence significance. I had the opportunity to interview Margaret Thatcher in 1997. And of course, Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister in 1980 when this incident took place. I talked to her about military personnel, scientists who are now coming forward and talking about their encounters. She turned around and said, "You have to have the facts and you can't tell the people." Now, why can't I tell the people? Why can't the people be told? But if you think about it, does the government know what's going on? I mean, are they able to deal with this? What president or prime minister would want to risk their reputation by standing up and saying, "Yes, we have had contact"?
There are things that happen that you can't explain away.
There's something up on that top floor that's walking around that is not of this world.
This thing was coming towards our window, and of course my first thought was Jason. You know, where's Jason? Is he okay?
There does seem to be certain places that have a kind of energy that maybe facilitates it for the visitors to actually access you.
These stories are some of the strangest experiences ever described in the UK. We can't tell if they're true, but they are all recounted by ordinary people. Now they are your witnesses. This is Micklegate Bar, the imposing main entrance to the ancient city of York. Dating from 1196, it is the place where kings and queens have entered the city for centuries to be greeted by the sheriff, the Lord Mayor, and other local dignitaries. But it has a darker past too. Criminals, traitors to the crown, and others all passed through the gates of Micklegate Bar on the way to their deaths. A ghost story in a historic city like York is by no means unusual, but a group of ghost enthusiasts recently dubbed York Europe's most haunted city. It's a label that suits the city, and it's a claim that some of the visitors to Micklegate Bar would support.
There's been talk and stories of ghosts in this place, which is bound to be in an 800-year-old building where they used to put the heads. But I've had the experience, if you like, of ghosts. You can't be in here as much time as I am, as long as I am, without coming across the odd experience. Things that go bump in the night or even during the day.
Well, I live in York and I'd never been.
and you tend to avoid the tourist attractions sometimes, but people say, oh, have you been here, have you been there? And we thought, had some time free with a friend, and I thought, well, we'll just go and have a look round. It's very pretty from the outside. I thought there must be lots of history, so I'll go in and check it out.
The first time I actually came in here was only a few weeks ago, and I came with a group of friends specifically to have a look around in the hope that something unusual would happen.
One of my people came in, people I have work here, came in one day and found that the soldiers, with the model soldiers that we have that we sell in the shop, had all been rearranged. That happens quite a bit. The things, the magnets that we have on the shelves, they have a habit of coming down, falling down, and things get knocked over, and which we can't explain away.
One of the centres in this country of paranormal activity appears to be the city of York. There are enormous numbers of ghost reports from the city itself, from just outside, places like Sheriff Hutton and so on. And the best guess that I could put on that is that it itself is in touch with its own history. Therefore, people are emotionally involved with its own history.
It started in the shop, really. We were in the shop a few minutes, and I was talking to the guy behind the counter, and this noise went off, this man's voice, and it sounded artificial anyway. I said, oh, what was that? He goes, oh, it's okay, it's the motion sensor. I said, oh, we must have gone across something. He said, no. He says it does that all the time. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's in there. He said, you have to walk in there to set it off. But we didn't walk in there. Neither did you. Is there someone in there? No. He said, it just does it. It's probably the poltergeist. I thought, okay.
I do think that some people are more susceptible to seeing ghosts than other people, whether it's because they themselves have a particular mindset or not, or whether it's because they have some other talent or ability is undecided.
The motion sensitive voice thing set off without anybody moving, and obviously we were the only people back there at the time. We were all stood in a little huddle, we were nowhere near it.
There's a guard, a royalist guard, that challenges people.
Oi! Who's that? Come here and show yourself.
Which causes a bit of a shock when they go in there, but it causes a shock when it goes off and there isn't anybody near there. And that happened with Rachel, and it's happened to many people who've been in Micklegate Bar.
Got up to the first floor, and I was absolutely convinced I could hear footsteps, absolutely convinced. And I looked at my friend, and they looked at me. We never said a word, but it's that, you heard something, didn't you? And I thought, well, it's okay. There'll be people elsewhere in the building. There's 3 floors. It's fine. Of course, later we found out there was nobody but us. Absolutely nobody.
Well, I heard initially 3 raps, like somebody knocking on the floor above us. And I stopped and looked round and said, did anybody else hear that? I'm sure I can hear something upstairs. So Dave said, well, I think it's empty up there. And with that, we heard this footfall, and there was definitely footsteps on that top floor. And that Dave shot up the stairs to look and said, there is definitely nobody up here.
You can be in this room and you can hear footsteps very clearly walking backwards and forwards. When I first used to come here, I used to go up the stairs to look to see if there was someone there. After a while, you get used to it and you don't bother.
A talking exhibit triggered with no one in the room. Unexplained movement of artifacts, changes in temperature, an unseen hand tugging at people's clothes. Some visitors claim first-hand experience.
We kept feeling sort of cold spots as we were wandering around, I think on both floors, but then with the nature of the building, we couldn't really say, well, you know, this is something supernatural happening, because it is an old building, there are drafts, and it is made of some quite thick stonework.
It was like a column of cold. It felt like a column just passed through me and around me. It wasn't a draft. It just literally went through. It's the strangest feeling. And it went through up to about my shoulder, and I absolutely felt freezing cold, and even it went through my body. That's how it felt. All the time now, I'm starting to feel as if there's someone behind me. And I kept on looking around, expecting my friend to be there, but of course, he's not. He's there. And there was nobody there. And everyone knows what it feels like when someone creeps up behind you, and you know they're there without looking. It's you just know. And that's how it felt like. So I'm disturbed all the time. I think there's someone there, there's someone there. And we're still walking around, and I'm still feeling very, very, very funny. And the next thing I know is there's a tug on my skirt. It's no mistake. My skirt's not caught on anything. You've seen for yourself that the place here, there's nothing that's going to catch on me. I'm in the middle of the floor. I can feel a tug on my skirt. I can sense the presence. I felt the cold. You know, now there is something going on, and I'm still feeling really funny.
I had a coat on with quite heavy sleeves, and it did feel like someone was tugging at my sleeves. And at the time I just tried to ignore it, thinking, well, this is a bit corny, because we already knew the story. Whilst I was still on that top floor, I felt like somebody had walked into me, when somebody catches your shoulder as they bump you. And I sort of got a beery smell like he's a drunken man. Or I've no idea who that was, but there was definitely nobody there when we looked round.
One of the resident ghosts we have in here is Sarah Brocklebank, the gatekeeper's daughter. She actually used to live in this building back in 1797. Her father Thomas was a gatekeeper, and on her birthday she played a childish game. She took the keys to the City of York. These are just replicas. She took the originals and hid them so well that no one could find them.
It's her ghost or her poltergeist, if you like, because apparently she moves things. I've not been witness to that. But it's her ghost that is trying to find the keys, but is also making herself aware that she's still here.
She hid them so well she couldn't find them, so her father lost his job, no good having a gatekeeper who loses the keys. The family were thrown out into the street. She never married. She spent the rest of her life searching for the keys, never found them. And on her 72nd birthday, it came back to her where the keys were. Couldn't get in here to recover them, went to tell the Lord Mayor of York where they were. But before she could tell him, she was so excited she had a heart attack and died. Took the secret with her to the grave. She's still seen from time to time wandering around this building. That may account for some of the things that happen in here. A lot of the things that happen in this room, in particular, are things that a child will do. They're childish pranks. And quite a number of people, as happened the other week when there was a number of people here, they felt like somebody tugging, like a small child would tug at your clothes. So that could possibly explain some of the things that happen. They do say that a poltergeist, I understand, is a young child.
Is the ghost of Sarah Brocklebank responsible for the strange experiences claimed by some of the visitors to Micklegate Bar? The legend is compelling. The atmosphere is eerie. But is this an example of people wanting to believe in something that doesn't actually exist?
I do think in ghosts that the living play some part in investing some kind of emotion into making those replays and so on. And York, along with perhaps Colchester, along with perhaps places down in Wiltshire, in Warminster and so on, are those centres where people are very aware of the ancient history of the place. And I think that plays a part in it.
The fact that I'd had my skirt tugged, that's a very childish thing to do, isn't it? You know, it's not something an adult's going to do. And the cold was... it just made so much sense. And I could hear the footsteps as well as if somebody was wandering around. And I just constantly felt there's somebody with me.
I don't think there's anything evil here. There's nothing that worries me here, other than the cold. It gets very cold in here. The walls are 5 foot thick. But I think our ghosts, we're very fortunate. They're more mischievous.
As far as I'm convinced, yes, there is something up on that top floor that's walking around that is not of this world.
If you spend any time in here, for any length of time, you get around to the feeling that there are things that happen that you can't explain away.
It just all fitted. It was just really, really strange for it to fit like that.
Whatever the explanation, the ghosts of Micklegate Bar are a magnet for tourists and ghost hunters alike.
We don't know enough to make any quantifiable definition of what they are. We have to be open to maybe all possibilities.
It got really bizarre at times, you know. It was like we had a lot of poltergeist activity.
There are many well-documented reports of close encounters with aliens, but few people experience more than one in their lifetime. Anne Andrews and her 2 children all claim to be the victims of repeated alien abductions over a period of several years. But are these genuine accounts of alien contact, or another entirely different paranormal experience? It began in 1983, when Anne's son Jason was born.
We would find him missing from his cot. He would sometimes be underneath it. We would hear him cry in the night and go into his room and find that he was at the wrong end of the cot, where it was impossible for a month-old baby to get to.
Mary Rodwell is a counsellor who deals with people who say they are the victims of alien abduction. She feels Jason's case is authentic.
It's absolutely classic abduction, right from the whole parameter of, Jason being born and, You know, finding him as a baby outside the cot and not explaining it, where I hear that the same thing from other people saying, my son was not in the cot, and I couldn't work it out. A lot of very tangible physical things.
I think they've more to lose than they have to gain by claiming these accounts. So it's usually that kind of thing that convinces me that whatever these experiences are, that people like Anne and others are on the level. They are relating the information as to the best of their ability.
But the unusual events happening to Jason were about to take a new and frightening turn. On the 2nd of July 1987, Jason's 4th birthday, the family would experience a visit they would never forget.
Jason had fallen asleep on the couch, and suddenly there was a real sort of heavy banging at the door. It was like really, really hard, not like just a normal knocking. It was like, somebody was kicking. And of course, my husband, he just jumped straight up, said, who's that, doing that to my door? And he just sort of flung the door open, and there was nobody there at all. And he looked up and down the lane, and there was nothing. He came back in, closed the door, and said to myself and my mum, well, that's odd, there's nobody there, but we'd all heard the knocking. Then there was a really sort of bright bolt of lightning. He just opened his mouth and just started spewing out all these fantastic numbers. It was just like a computer. This went on for a few minutes, and as he was talking the numbers, the banging began again. But this time it seemed to reverberate, sort of, it got louder and louder, and it seemed to be coming not just from the front door, but from the windows, the back of the house. Jason just seemed to get up from the couch, and he walked over towards the door. My husband restrained Jason, and he just literally looked up at my husband and just said, but I have to go, they're waiting for me. And the banging all the while was just going on, and it was just so strange. It was like, as soon as Jason started to blink, as if he was coming out of this trance-like state, he started to blink. And the more he came round, the more the banging receded.
They're a fascinating series of events, plus the fact that it involves more than one person. Again, I think the vast majority of this type of experience involves a single witness. But it's not uncommon that other family members are involved.
Was this evidence of alien visits, or were the family experiencing a different paranormal phenomenon?
The house was never the same after that. It got really bizarre at times. It was like we had a lot of poltergeist activity. The cooker would come on, the television would switch on sort of in the middle of the night, really blaring, and it didn't matter if you had the plugs in or out, it would still... It's like everything electrical had a mind of its own.
Loud bangs, like someone's crawling over the ceiling, and 3 loud knocks is a very common one that they will hear. It's almost like what the ETs are doing is saying, this is real, take notice of us.
If you take out the content for a while and look at the parameters that build up these experiences, you can transpose them onto other paranormal accounts, paranormal sightings, paranormal phenomena, and so on. So the parallels are there for all to see. It's just the content that differs. And we've often argued that we could be looking at different sides of the same coin. They are all interrelated in some way.
I still, for a long time, believed that they were dreams. They were nothing more than nightmares. My, I suppose, social upbringing would not allow me to consider any other possibility.
But the stories of alien visits were not just confined to Jason. His elder brother Daniel said he too had strange encounters.
My older boy Daniel said, don't you both get it? Don't you see what's going on? Can't you understand it yet? He said, remember when I used to tell you about when I was little, I used to tell you about my soldier guy, that used to come and see me, and we said yes, which we'd always thought was an imaginary friend. And he said, well, he said, I know now that he was real. He said, I think I've always known he was real. He said, but he said he stopped coming to see me because he said that they'd made a mistake and that Jason was the one that they should be working with. We were talking to experts in the UFO field. We were speaking to people about UFO alien abductions.
We don't know enough to make any quantifiable definition of what they are. We have to be open to maybe all possibilities, but there's certainly a tangible interaction, and there's certainly a physical interaction.
Jason always described the same scenario. He will be lying in his bed. He would first of all notice, like what he always referred to as the big one, would rise up through the floor at the foot of his bed. Then he said there would suddenly be 6 or 8 of the smaller ones. He said that he could see, but he couldn't move. And he would be taken to another place, which when he was younger he described as a hospital place. But he said it was always very cold, extremely cold. He said he described it as like being laid on like a marble slab, something of this kind. He said there was always a light coming from somewhere, but you could never see where it was coming from.
It was now Anne's turn to claim that she too had been abducted by aliens.
She didn't know, I think, that she was an abductee or experiencer to start with. She only thought Jason was. It was only later that she came to an awareness that it affected her and her husband and Dan as well. So that was something for her. But by the time she was corresponding with me and we were talking, it was an everyday part of their lives, something that they'd already come to a certain extent to terms with.
We saw what we thought initially to be a star, very bright star, which we didn't take too much notice of, but then when the star started getting bigger and bigger and looked as if it was coming straight for our window, we did get quite alarmed. We don't remember any more than that, other than sort of the panic that this thing was coming towards the window. And of course we woke in the morning just as normal, and then all of a sudden I remembered. Of course my first thought was Jason, where's Jason? Is he okay? I spoke to him and I said to him that, we'd seen this really bright light last night. And he then went on to explain that he'd been taken to a place. It wasn't a usual abduction this time, which he was relieved about. But then he started to say that he was in a room with hundreds of other people and there was like a big cinema screen. And it was just so weird because I finished off his sentence for him. I told him what was on the screen and what was going on and about the other people there. And he just looked at me and smiled and he just said, "Oh, I knew I saw you there, Mum."
Is this proof of aliens abducting a whole family? Or does it show an unexplained psychic bond between a mother and her children?
They'll talk about stuff that would blow your mind. They talk about things that are almost like science fiction, and yet they go into detail, and they have so much depth of knowledge of it, full well this is no fantasy.
If you talk about theories in general, the theories to try and explain these experiences are largely put forward by the UFO researcher, be it in the UK or be it in different parts of the world. It is rare that anyone asks the individuals who've had these experiences what their theories are. Now, I've done this recently, very, very recently, to a small group of known abductees, and I've asked them what they believe was the nature and origin of their experience. And surprisingly, not all of them said extraterrestrial. Some believed that they were actually having some kind of spiritual experience. Some indeed think this was ET related. Also, others thought it was some kind of paranormal phenomena. So, when it comes to theories, the most popular and the most romantic, if you like, is that we're being visited by extraterrestrials who are conducting some kind of experiment. But it is by no means the only theory.
People always ask how we deal with this situation. I suppose it's like the realization hits you that there's nothing you can do about this situation.